Tonight we will embark on a gentle journey, not to a destination, but into presence. We will explore the timeless wisdom of the Buddha, teachings that have served as a refuge for restless minds for over 2,500 years. Welcome to Sleep Zen Meditations, a sanctuary where ancient wisdom meets the stillness of night. Here, there is nothing you need to do, nothing to fix, and no one you need to become. You are already complete, already whole, exactly as you are in this moment. If this path calls to you, if these teachings bring you peace, I gently invite you to subscribe to this channel. By doing so, you join a community of seekers who gather here each night to rest in the profound simplicity of the Buddha's wisdom. But there is no pressure, no obligation. Simply allow these words to wash over you like warm water, like gentle rain on willing soil. Tonight, we explore one of the most liberating truths ever discovered by the human mind. You are not your thoughts. This simple statement, when truly understood, when felt deeply in the body and heart, has the power to transform everything. For thousands of years, practitioners have discovered that the relentless stream of mental chatter, the endless commentary that runs through our minds from the moment we wake until we fall into fitful sleep, is not who we are. It is something we experience, yes, but it is not our essence. It is not our true nature. The thoughts that arise in your mind right now, the ones that might be analyzing these words, planning tomorrow, remembering yesterday, judging, comparing, worrying, hoping, these are like clouds passing through the vast sky of your awareness. They come and they go. They appear and they dissolve. But the sky itself remains unchanged, unblemished, eternally clear and spacious. You are that sky. You are the awareness in which thoughts arise and pass away. You are the space in which all experience unfolds. This is not a metaphor. This is not poetry. This is the direct, immediate truth of your being, always available, always present, waiting patiently beneath the noise of the thinking mind. Tonight, we will meet this truth through stories, ancient stories and timeless stories, stories of ordinary people who discovered this extraordinary freedom. We will walk with weavers and scholars, with cooks and merchants, with monks and artists. We will witness their struggles and their awakenings, and through their journeys we may recognize our own. These teachings are not rules to follow or beliefs to adopt. They are invitations to look directly at your own experience. They are mirrors that reflect the truth you already know, somewhere deep beneath the surface of conscious thought. They are old friends greeting you after a long journey, reminding you of what you forgot but never truly lost. So settle now into whatever position brings you comfort. Let your body sink into the surface beneath you. Feel the gentle pull of gravity inviting you down, down, down into deep rest. There is nothing more for you to do tonight, nothing to accomplish, no one to impress, no goal to reach, just breathe. Let us begin this journey together. Breathe in slowly through your nose, hold for a moment at the top, and release through your mouth with a soft sigh. Again, breathing in the present moment, breathing out all effort, breathing in this invitation to rest, breathing out all resistance. Good. Now, let us turn to our first story. There once lived a master weaver named Kenji, who worked in a small mountain village where the morning mist clung to the valleys like silk scarves. His workshop sat at the edge of the village, a wooden structure with large windows that let in the soft northern light. Inside, His loom stood like a faithful companion, its thread stretched taut and waiting, its shuttle worn smooth by decades of his hands, passing it back and forth, in the ancient rhythm of his craft. Kenji had learned weaving from his father, who had learned it from his father before him, stretching back through 7 generations of weavers, each one passing down not just the techniques, but the quiet devotion required to transform simple threads into something beautiful. For 40 years, Kenji had sat at his loom each morning as the sun rose, working until the light grew too dim to see the subtle variations in color that made his textiles famous throughout the region. People traveled from distant cities to purchase Kenji's work. His fabrics had a quality that others couldn't quite name. They were technically perfect, yes, with threads so evenly tensioned that the patterns seemed to float on the surface. But there was something more, something alive in them, something that made people pause when they touched the cloth, as if the fabric itself contained a kind of presence, a kind of peace. But in recent years, something had changed, not in the fabric itself, which remained as beautiful as ever when completed. The change was in Kenji, in his mind, in the experience of weaving. Where once there had been a flowing silence as he worked, now there was a constant stream of commentary, a voice, or perhaps many voices, that never seemed to rest. They began the moment he woke, sometimes even before he opened his eyes. "You're getting old," the voice would say as he walked to his workshop in the pre-dawn darkness. "Your eyes aren't what they used to be. You're going to make a mistake. People will notice. Your reputation will suffer." He would sit at his loom and reach for the shuttle, and the voice would continue. "That thread tension isn't quite right. You've never been able to get it perfectly even. Your father was better at this than you. He would be disappointed." As he worked, the commentary never stopped. "You're going too slowly. This piece should have been finished yesterday. You're falling behind. You're losing your touch. That color combination isn't working. You should have chosen differently. It's too late to fix it now. You've ruined it." The worst part was not the content of these thoughts. Kenji had been weaving long enough to know that perfection was impossible, that each piece had its own character, its flaws, and its unexpected beauties. The worst part was that he believed the voice. He believed it was him. When the thought arose, "You're a fraud," Kenji felt the shame of being a fraud. When the thought said, "You're going to fail," Kenji felt the anxiety of impending failure. When the voice criticized each movement of his hands, Kenji's hands began to tremble. His work began to feel like torture. The thing he had loved for 40 years, the craft that had been as natural to him as breathing, now filled him with dread. Each morning required enormous effort just to open the workshop door. Each day at the loom was a battle against the relentless voice in his head, telling him he wasn't good enough, fast enough, skilled enough. He found himself working slower and slower, not because his hands had lost their skill, but because he was caught in an endless loop of starting, stopping, doubting, adjusting, doubting again. A piece that once took him 2 weeks now took a month, and still the voice was never satisfied. "That's not quite right," it would say when he finished a section. "You can do better. Your father would have done better. You need to redo it." And Kenji would redo it, and the voice would find something else to criticize, and he would redo that. On and on, in a cycle that left him exhausted not in his body, but in some deeper place, some place he couldn't name. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Kenji walked away from his loom without finishing the section he had started. This was something he never did. A weaver must complete what he begins in a single session, or the tension changes and the pattern shows the break. But he couldn't continue. His hands were shaking. His chest felt tight. The voice in his head had become so loud, so relentless, that he felt as if he might shatter. He walked out of his workshop and down the path toward the river that ran through the valley below the village. It was late spring, and the cherry trees that lined the riverbank were in full bloom, their pink petals drifting down like snow in the evening breeze. The air was cool and smelled of water and new growth. Kenji had not come to the river with any intention. He had simply needed to escape the confines of his workshop, the presence of his loom, the scene of his daily suffering. But as he approached the riverbank, he noticed someone sitting there, an elderly woman in the simple gray robes of a Buddhist nun. She sat on a flat rock near the water's edge, perfectly still, her eyes open, watching the river flow past. Kenji had seen her before. She lived in a small hermitage further up the mountain and occasionally came down to the village for supplies. People spoke of her with respect, but also with a kind of confusion. She had been a successful businesswoman in the city, they said, before giving everything away and coming to the mountains to practice meditation. She spoke little. She seemed to need nothing. She simply sat, hour after hour, day after day, watching the river, watching the sky, watching whatever was before her. Kenji meant to walk past her without disturbing her stillness. But as he drew near, she turned her head slightly and looked at him. Her eyes were clear and dark like deep water. She smiled softly, and the smile seemed to carry no agenda, no judgment, no expectation. It was simply a smile of recognition, as if she saw him completely and found nothing lacking. Something in that smile broke open something in Kenji's chest. Before he knew what he was doing, he was sitting on the ground near her rock, and words were spilling out of him. Words about the voice in his head, words about his suffering, words about how weaving, the thing he had loved most in the world, had become a kind of prison. The nun listened, without interrupting. She nodded occasionally. Her face showed no trace of trying to solve his problem or fix his pain. She simply received his words, the way the river received the cherry blossoms that fell onto its surface, carrying them gently without resistance. When Kenji finally fell silent, his words exhausted, the nun continued to look at the river for a long moment. Then she turned to him and spoke in a voice that was soft but clear, like water over stones. "This voice you describe," she said, "the one that criticizes and judges and predicts disaster. Where is it right now?" Kenji blinked, confused by the question. It's in my head, in my mind. It's always there." "Always?" the nun asked. "Even now?" Kenji paused. He listened inward, and he noticed, with a start, that the voice was not speaking. In the surprise of sitting here, in the relief of being heard, the commentary had stopped. There was silence in his mind, just the sound of the river, just the feeling of the breeze, just the fading light and the scent of cherry blossoms. It's quiet right now," he admitted. The nun nodded. "So it is not always there. It comes and goes." "Yes," Kenji said. "But when it's there, it feels so real, so true. Like it's me speaking to myself, like it's my own voice telling me the truth about myself." "Ah," the nun said. She picked up a small stone from the riverbank and held it in her palm. "Is this stone the river?" Kenji looked at her, puzzled. "No, the stone is just resting in the river." And when the current carries it downstream, does that stone become the river? No, Kenji said. It's still just a stone. The river is what carries it. The nun smiled and gently tossed the stone into the water. They watched it sink and disappear. Thoughts are like stones, she said. They appear in the river of your awareness. They are carried by that awareness, but they are not the awareness itself. You are not the stones. You are the river. Kenji felt something shift in his chest, though he couldn't quite grasp what she meant. But the thoughts feel like me, he said. When the voice says, I am not good enough, I feel it. I believe it. It doesn't feel like a stone passing through. It feels like the truth of who I am. The nun was quiet for a moment, still watching the water. Tell me, she said, when you were a child, learning to weave from your father, did this voice criticize you then? Kenji thought back. He remembered sitting at a small loom his father had built for him. He remembered the frustration of his clumsy young fingers trying to manage the shuttle. He remembered his father's patient corrections. But no, there had been no voice. There had been only the experience of learning, of trying, of slowly improving. No, he said. The voice started later, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. So, this voice that feels so essentially you, so permanently you, did not exist for most of your life? Kenji sat with this. It was true. The commentary, the criticism, the relentless judgment. These were relatively recent visitors. They had not always been present. They had appeared at some point and grown stronger over time. But they were not original to him, not fundamental to his existence. No, he said quietly. They appeared later. And before they appeared, the nun asked, were you not yourself? This question stopped Kenji completely. Of course he had been himself. He had been Kenji the child, Kenji the young man learning his craft, Kenji the husband, the father, the weaver. He had been fully himself, perhaps even more fully himself before the voice arrived. I was myself, he said, maybe more myself than I am now. The nun nodded. So if you were yourself before the voice, and if the voice sometimes stops like it did a moment ago, then perhaps the voice is not you. Perhaps it is something that happens to you, something that arises in your awareness, like weather arises in the sky, sometimes stormy, sometimes calm, but the sky remains unchanged by the weather that passes through it. Kenji felt tears rising in his eyes, though he didn't fully understand why. Some deep part of him recognized the truth in her words. Some part of him felt the possibility of freedom. But how do I stop it? He asked. How do I make the voice go away? The nun smiled again, and this time there was something almost playful in her expression. The sky does not try to stop the clouds, she said. It simply allows them to pass. When you try to fight the thoughts, you give them more power. You make them more solid, more real. The clouds become a storm. But when you simply notice them, when you see them as thoughts rather than truth, they lose their weight. They become transparent. I don't understand, Kenji said. How do I just notice them? They feel so overwhelming. Try something, the nun said. Right now, think the thought, I am not a good weaver. Kenji hesitated, not wanting to invite the voice back. But he did as she asked. In his mind, he deliberately thought the words, I am not a good weaver. Now, the nun said, notice that you just thought that thought. Notice that there is an awareness in you that observes the thought arising. That awareness, the one that notices the thought, is it troubled by the thought? Kenji paused, paying attention. There was the thought floating in his mind, I am not a good weaver. And there was something else, something that was watching the thought, something that could see the thought as an object, as a phenomenon, rather than as reality itself. And that something, that awareness, felt completely calm, completely untroubled. The thought was like a fish swimming in clear water, visible but not disturbing the water's clarity. No, Kenji said, wonder creeping into his voice. The part that notices the thought is not troubled. It's just watching. That, the nun said softly, is who you are. You are the awareness that watches the khois, thoughts. You are the space in which the thoughts appear. The thoughts themselves are just visitors, some pleasant, some unpleasant, but all temporary, all passing. You don't need to fight them or fix them or make them go away. You only need to recognize that you are not them. You are what notices them. They sat together in silence as the last light faded from the sky. The river continued its ancient song. Cherry blossoms continued their gentle fall. And inside Kenji's mind, thoughts continued to arise and pass away. But now, for the first time in years, there was a small space between him and the thoughts, a tiny gap of awareness that changed everything. Come to the river each evening, the nun said as she prepared to leave. Sit here for a time before you return home. Practice watching the thoughts the way you watch the water. Don't judge them. Don't try to change them. Just notice them. See how they come and see how they go. This is the practice. This is the path. Kenji bowed to her, gratitude flooding through him. He did not yet fully understand what had happened, but something essential had shifted. Some burden had lightened. He walked back to his village as darkness settled over the mountains, and for the first time in years his mind was quiet. Not because the thoughts had stopped forever, but because he had discovered the space in which they arose. And that space was vast and peaceful, and utterly untouched by the content of the thoughts themselves. This story reveals one of Buddhism's most liberating and practical teachings for inner peace. Our minds have a natural tendency to produce thoughts constantly, like a spring produces water or a tree produces leaves. This is not a problem. This is not a flaw in our consciousness. It is simply what minds do. The problem arises when we confuse the thoughts with our identity, when we believe we are our thoughts. The Buddha taught that what we call the self is not a fixed, permanent entity, but rather a constantly changing stream of experiences, sensations, emotions, and yes, thoughts. He used the term anatta, or non-self, to describe this reality. We are not our thoughts in the same way that the sky is not the weather. The weather happens in the sky. Thoughts happen in awareness. But the sky remains vast and clear, regardless of whether the weather is sunny or stormy. And our awareness remains fundamentally peaceful, regardless of whether the thoughts are pleasant or disturbing. This teaching is not asking you to stop thinking. That would be impossible, and even if it were possible, it would not be desirable. Thoughts are useful. They help us plan and learn and create and communicate. The teaching is simply inviting you to recognize the difference between having thoughts and being thoughts, between experiencing mental activity and identifying as that mental activity. Consider this carefully. Right now, as you listen to these words, thoughts are probably arising in your mind. Perhaps you're thinking about whether you agree with what's being said. Perhaps you're planning tomorrow. Perhaps you're remembering something from earlier today. Notice that there is something in you that is aware of these thoughts, something that can observe the thinking process. That observing awareness is always calm, always clear, always at peace. It is like a mirror that reflects everything but is changed by nothing. When we identify with our thoughts, we ride a roller coaster of emotions. A thought arises. I'm not good enough. We believe it, and immediately we feel the pain of inadequacy. Another thought. Everyone is judging me. We believe it, and immediately we feel anxious and defensive. Another thought. Something terrible is going to happen. We believe it, and immediately we feel fear and dread. We are tossed around by every mental weather pattern that passes through. But when we recognize thoughts as simply phenomena arising in awareness, everything changes. The thought, I'm not good enough, still arises, but now there is a spaciousness around it. We can observe it the way Kenji learned to observe his critical inner voice by the river. We can notice, there is a thought about inadequacy. And in that noticing, in that simple recognition, we are no longer caught. We are no longer swept away. The thought loses its power to disturb our fundamental peace. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is not denying difficult emotions or pretending painful thoughts don't hurt. Pain is real. Suffering is real. But there is a difference between the pain that naturally arises from life's challenges and the suffering we add by completely identifying with our thoughts about those challenges. The Buddha called this second layer of suffering the second arrow. The first arrow is what happens to us, the challenging situation, the difficult emotion, the painful physical sensation. The second arrow is what we do to ourselves by believing every thought about what happened. This shouldn't have happened. I can't handle this. This means I'm a failure. This will never get better. These thoughts are the second arrow, and unlike the first arrow, they are optional. By learning to see thoughts as thoughts rather than as truth, we can remove the second arrow. We can meet life's inevitable difficulties with less added suffering. We can experience our emotions fully without being destroyed by them. We can have our thoughts without being had by them. The practice Kenji's teacher suggested is simple but profound. Sit in a quiet place. Watch your mind the way you would watch a river. Notice the thoughts that arise. Don't judge them as good or bad. Don't try to stop them or change them. Simply notice. Here is a thought about work. Here is a worry about the future. Here is a memory from the past. Here is a judgment. Here is a plan. Name them gently, the way you might name birds flying past. And in the naming, in the noticing, you are already standing in that awareness that is beyond the thoughts. You are already resting in your true nature. This doesn't mean the difficult thoughts will never arise again. They will. The mind has formed habits over many years, and these habits don't disappear overnight. But each time you practice noticing thoughts as thoughts, you strengthen your recognition of the space of awareness in which they appear. You strengthen your capacity to remain centered, even as the mental weather changes. You discover a kind of inner stability that doesn't depend on having only pleasant thoughts. Over time, something remarkable happens. The thoughts begin to lose their solidity. They become more transparent, more obviously temporary. You might still have the thought, I'm not good enough, but it no longer feels like an absolute truth. It feels like a thought, a mental event. something arising and passing in the vast space of your awareness. And that awareness, that witnessing presence, remains untouched, peaceful, free. This is the beginning of what the Buddha called liberation. Not liberation from having a human mind, not liberation from the natural arising of thoughts and emotions, but liberation from the belief that you are nothing more than your thoughts and emotions. Liberation from the prison of complete identification with mental content. Liberation into the recognition of your true nature as the spacious awareness in which all experience arises and passes away. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Feel the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. Notice how your breath moves in and out without any effort from you. Notice how awareness is present for the breath without any effort from you. This noticing, this awareness is always here. It is here before thoughts arise. It is here as thoughts arise. It is here after thoughts pass away. You are not your thoughts. You are the clear sky of awareness in which all mental weather passes. Rest in this recognition now. Let your body soften. Let your mind be as it is. There is nothing more for you to do right now except rest in the simple knowing that you are aware. You are here. You are present. And that is enough. Breathe gently. And when you're ready, we will continue our journey together. Now, let us turn to another story that illuminates this teaching from a different angle. In a small monastery, nestled high in the mountains, where eagles nested and clouds gathered below the peaks, there lived a monk named Yuki, who served as the monastery's cook. Each morning before dawn, she would rise from her thin sleeping mat and make her way through the cold stone corridors to the kitchen, where she would begin preparing meals for the 40 monks who lived there. Yuki had not always been a monk. 20 years earlier, she had been a young mother in the city, married to a merchant, raising 2 small children. Her life had been full of ordinary joys and ordinary worries, until the night a fire swept through their neighborhood. She had lost her husband and both children in that fire. She had survived only because she had been at the market when it started. By the time she ran home, there was nothing but ash and silence. The grief had been unbearable. For months she could barely speak or eat or sleep. The world had become a gray place devoid of meaning. But slowly, with the help of a Buddhist teacher she met by chance, she had begun to find a way forward. She had taken vows as a nun. She had come to this remote monastery. She had learned to sit in meditation for hours, watching her breath, watching her thoughts, watching the endless waves of grief arise and pass, arise and pass. Over the years, the sharp edge of her grief had softened. She had found a kind of peace in the simplicity of monastic life. The steady rhythm of practice, the silence, the routine, and especially she had found peace in cooking. There was something meditative about preparing food for others, chopping vegetables, tending the fire, stirring the pots. Each action required complete attention, leaving no room for the mind to wander into suffering. But despite her years of practice, despite the peace she had found, Yuki struggled with one persistent pattern. Her mind was constantly projecting into the future, always anticipating disaster, always preparing for the next terrible thing to happen. She called it her disaster mind. When she was chopping vegetables, her disaster mind would whisper, "You're going to cut yourself. The knife is sharp. You're tired. Your attention will slip and you'll cut deep into your hand. There will be blood. You'll faint. No one will find you in time." When she was tending the fire, the voice would say, The wood is too dry. The flames are too high. A spark will jump onto the wooden floor. The whole kitchen will burn. Then the monastery will burn. Everyone will die. It will be your fault, just like before. When she was preparing soup, the disaster mind would catalog every possible way the meal could go wrong. You added too much salt. Everyone will complain. Or perhaps not enough salt. The abbot will be disappointed. Or maybe the vegetables weren't fresh enough. Someone will get sick. They'll accuse you of carelessness. Or the soup will be too hot. Someone will burn their mouth. They'll lose their ability to taste. It will be your fault. The actual disasters her mind predicted never happened. In 20 years of cooking in the monastery kitchen, Yuki had never cut herself badly, never started a fire, never made anyone sick, never seriously burned anyone with hot food. The meals were consistently good. The monks often complimented her cooking. The abbot had told her many times that her food was made with love and care, that people could taste the meditation in it. But none of this mattered to her disaster mind. It was utterly unconvinced by evidence. Each day it would generate new catastrophes to worry about, new terrible futures to prepare for. And Yuki, despite all her meditation practice, despite her understanding of Buddhist teachings, found herself believing these thoughts. Each prediction of disaster felt real, felt true, felt like something she needed to attend to and prevent. The worry was exhausting. By evening, after spending the entire day in a state of hypervigilance, monitoring every possible thing that could go wrong, Yuki was depleted. Not physically tired. The work itself was not that demanding, but tired in her bones, tired in her mind, tired in her spirit. The disaster mind never rested, never relented, never ran out of new catastrophes to imagine. One winter morning, as she was preparing the morning rice, the disaster mind was particularly active. The fire isn't hot enough. The rice won't cook properly. It will be hard and inedible. The monks will go hungry. Their meditation practice will suffer because they're weak from not eating. The abbot will ask you to leave. You'll have nowhere to go. You'll freeze to death in the winter. Yuki found herself checking the fire constantly, adding more wood, checking again, unsure if it was hot enough, worried it was too hot, checking the rice, checking the fire, trapped in a spiral of anxiety. She was so absorbed in this worried checking that she didn't notice the abbot had entered the kitchen until he spoke. "Yuki," he said gently, his old voice like rustling leaves. "The rice will be fine." She startled, nearly dropping the ladle she was holding. I was just making sure the temperature is right," she said, embarrassed to be caught in her worry. The abbot, a man in his 80s who had lived in the monastery for 60 years, smiled. He walked slowly to the fire and looked at it with the calm attention he brought to everything. "The fire is good," he said. "The rice is cooking well. I can smell it. Why do you check so many times?" Yuki felt tears rising. "I'm worried something will go wrong," she admitted. "I'm always worried something will go wrong." The abbot nodded slowly. He pulled up a small stool and sat near the fire, gesturing for Yuki to sit as well. She sat, still holding the ladle, still half listening for sounds from the pot that might indicate a problem. "Tell me," the abbot said, "what are you worried will go wrong right now?" Yuki hesitated, aware of how irrational her fears would sound. But she trusted this old monk, who had been kind to her since her first day at the monastery. "I'm worried the rice won't cook properly," she said, "that it will be hard, that everyone will be disappointed or hungry, that I will have failed in my duty. Ah, the abbot said, and has the rice ever failed to cook properly in the 20 years you've been here? No, Yuki admitted, but it could happen. It could happen, the abbot agreed. Many things could happen. The roof could collapse. The mountain could crack open. The sun could fail to rise tomorrow morning. All of these things could happen. Should we worry about them? All? Yuki smiled slightly despite herself. No, that would be impossible. So, why worry about the rice? Because, Yuki struggled to explain, because I'm responsible for it. Because if it goes wrong, it will be my fault, because I need to prevent it. The abbot was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire dance. Yuki, he said finally, you are not responsible for preventing every possible bad thing that might happen. You are only responsible for doing your best with what is in front of you right now. Right now, you have built a good fire. You have added the rice and water in the right proportions. You have set them to cook. That is all you can do. The rest is not in your control. But if I don't worry about it, if I don't check constantly, then I'm being careless, Yuki protested. Is there a difference, the abbot asked, between being attentive and being worried? This question stopped Yuki. She had never considered that there might be a difference. To her, attending carefully to her cooking and worrying about her cooking felt like the same thing. But as she sat with the question, she began to sense that perhaps they weren't the same at all. Attentiveness, the abbot continued, is being present with what is actually happening, noticing the smell of the rice, feeling the heat of the fire, seeing the steam rising from the pot, responding to what is needed in this moment. Worry is living in a story about what might happen in the future, what might go wrong, what terrible thing you might cause or fail to prevent. Attentiveness is here. Worry is in an imagined future that doesn't exist. But the future will exist, Yuki said. The rice will either be cooked well or it won't. That future will arrive. Yes, the abbot agreed. And when it arrives, it will be the present moment. And in that present moment, you will respond to whatever is actually happening. If the rice is perfect, you will serve it. If the rice is somehow wrong, you will do what can be done. But right now, that future hasn't arrived. Right now, there is only this moment, this fire, this pot, this breath, and in this moment, everything is actually fine. Yuki felt something crack open in her chest. It was true. In this actual moment, sitting here by the fire, nothing was wrong. The disaster her mind was predicting existed only in her thoughts, only in the story she was telling herself about the future. The present moment itself was peaceful. The fire was warm. The kitchen smelled good. She was alive and breathing. Everything was actually okay. But how do I stop the worry? She asked. How do I stop my mind from constantly jumping to terrible futures? The abbot smiled. You don't stop it. You see it. You recognize it when it's happening. You notice. Ah, right now my mind is telling a story about a disaster that hasn't happened and probably won't happen. And then you gently bring your attention back to what is actually here, the smell, the warmth, the breath. Again and again, for the rest of your life, you bring yourself back from the imagined future to the actual present. But the thoughts are so convincing, Yuki said. When my mind tells me something terrible is going to happen, it feels true. It feels like I need to believe it and prepare for it. Let me tell you something, the abbot said, leaning forward. I am 84 years old. I have lived through war and peace, famine and plenty, sickness and health, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that 99% of the things I worried about in my life never happened. Not 90%, 99%. The disasters my mind predicted, the catastrophes it was certain were coming, they almost never arrived. And the true difficulties I did face were never the ones I had worried about. Life brought different challenges, unexpected ones I couldn't have prepared for by worrying. He paused, letting this sink in. The worry didn't protect me from anything. It didn't prevent any suffering. It only made me suffer in advance for things that never came to pass. It stole the peace of 10,000 present moments for the sake of preparing for future disasters that remained imaginary. Yuki sat with this. She thought about all the hours, the days, the years she had spent worrying, all the present moments she had missed because her mind was busy projecting catastrophe, all the peace she had sacrificed for the illusion of control over an uncertain future. But some terrible things did happen, she said quietly, thinking of her family, of the fire that had taken them. Some disasters are real. The abbot's face softened with compassion. Yes, he said gently. Some terrible things happen. This is the truth of life. This is what the Buddha called dukkha, the suffering that is woven into existence. Loss happens, death happens. Things change and pass away. But tell me, when that fire happened 20 years ago, did all your previous worrying prevent it? Yuki shook her head, tears now flowing freely. No, I hadn't even been worried that day. It just happened. Exactly, the abbot said. The real disaster came without warning. And when it came, you did what humans do. You survived. You grieved. You healed. You found a way forward. Not because you had practiced worrying about fires, but because you have an inner strength that rises to meet whatever actually happens. That strength is always there. It doesn't need to be prepared by worry. It's just there, waiting, ready to meet whatever life brings. He reached over and gently took the ladle from her hand, setting it aside. Your disaster mind thinks it's protecting you, he said. It thinks that by imagining every possible catastrophe, it can prevent them or prepare you for them. But all it's really doing is making you suffer many times for things that happen once or never. It's stealing your life, moment by moment, for the sake of an illusion of control. So what do I do? Yuki asked. When the disaster thoughts come, when my mind is certain something terrible is about to happen, what do I do? You recognize them as thoughts, the abbot said. Not as truth, not as reality, not as accurate predictions of the future, just as thoughts, mental events, stories your mind is telling. And then you gently ask yourself, what is actually happening right now? Right here, in this present moment, what is true? And almost always, you will find that right now, in this moment, things are okay. Maybe not perfect, maybe not how you wish they were, but okay, manageable, bearable. He stood up slowly, his old joints creaking. The rice is ready, he said, gesturing to the pot. Serve it with the attention and care you always bring, but not with worry. Trust your skill. Trust that you have done your best, and trust that whatever happens, you will be able to meet it. In the days and weeks that followed, Yuki practiced what the abbot had taught her. When the disaster mind would start its familiar refrain of terrible futures, she would pause. She would notice, this is a thought. This is a story about the future. This is not what is actually happening right now. And then she would bring her attention back to the present, the knife in her hand, the vegetables on the board, the warmth of the fire, the smell of the food, the breath moving in and out of her body. At first, the practice felt impossible. The thoughts were so strong, so convincing, so relentless. She would catch herself checking the fire 10 times in 10 minutes, lost in worry. But each time she noticed, each time she recognized the worried thoughts as just thoughts and came back to the present, something loosened. Some tight knot of anxiety unraveled just a little bit. Slowly, over weeks and months, she began to experience something she had not felt in 20 years. Moments of simple, uncomplicated peace. Moments where she was just chopping vegetables, just stirring soup, just being present with the task at hand without any layer of worry or anticipation of disaster. The work itself became enough. The moment itself became full and satisfying. The disaster thoughts still arose. Even years later, her mind would sometimes spin out catastrophic scenarios. But she no longer believed them with the same absolute certainty. She had learned to recognize them as her mind's old habit, its attempt to protect her by imagining every possible danger. She could thank the thoughts for trying to help, and then gently set them aside, returning her attention to what was actually true, actually here, actually happening in the present moment. And in that present moment, she discovered there was almost always enough peace to breathe, almost always enough space to rest, almost always enough grace to meet whatever came with a steady heart. This story opens another door into the same teaching Kenji learned by the river. Not only are we not our thoughts, but we are especially not our thoughts about the future. These predictive thoughts, these worried projections, these catastrophic scenarios our minds generate, they feel so real, so important, so true. But they are just another form of mental weather, just another type of thought arising in awareness. The Buddha taught about what we might call the two times that steal our peace, the past and the future. When we are lost in thoughts about the past, we experience regret, shame, resentment, nostalgia, or grief for what was and is no more. When we are lost in thoughts about the future, we experience anxiety, fear, hope, anticipation, or dread about what might be but isn't yet. In both cases, we are missing the only time that actually exists. Right now. This present moment is the only moment you ever have to live in. The past is gone. It exists only as memory, as thoughts and images in your mind. The future hasn't arrived. It exists only as imagination, as projection, as a mental simulation. Neither the past nor the future is real, in the way this moment is real. Your breath right now is real. The sensation of your body right now is real. The awareness that is reading these words right now is real. Everything else is a story, a narrative, a mental construction. This doesn't mean we should never think about the past or plan for the future. Of course, we need to learn from experience. Of course, we need to make reasonable plans. But there is a difference between using thought as a tool and being used by thought. There is a difference between deliberately choosing to reflect on the past or consider the future and being involuntarily dragged into an endless stream of worried thoughts about what might happen. When we are present, when we are grounded in the reality of this moment, we can think about the future if we need to, and then return to the present. We can plan and then release the plan. We can consider possibilities and then let them go. But when we are identified with our thoughts, when we believe we are the worried mind, we become trapped in an exhausting cycle of anticipating disasters that rarely arrive. Consider Yuki's experience. For 20 years, she worried about catastrophes in the kitchen. None of them ever happened. Not one. All that suffering was unnecessary. It didn't prevent any actual problems. It didn't make her a better cook. It only robbed her of the peace and satisfaction that could have been present in each moment of her work. This is what worry does. It convinces us that it's useful, that it's necessary, that it's keeping us safe. But almost always, it's just creating suffering in the present moment for dangers that exist only in imagination. The worried mind says, if I don't worry about this, something terrible will happen. But the truth is, worrying doesn't prevent terrible things. It just makes us suffer more. Real attentiveness is different from worry. Real care is different from anxiety. When we are truly present, truly here, we can respond skillfully to what's in front of us. We can see what needs to be done and do it. We can notice when something is going wrong and adjust. We can act with genuine wisdom and competence. But we can only do this from the present moment, not from worried thoughts about imagined futures. The practice the abbot taught Yuki is simple but profound. Notice when your mind has jumped to the future. Notice when it's telling you disaster stories, and then ask yourself, what is actually happening right now? Not what might happen, not what you're afraid will happen, but what is actually, truly happening in this present moment. And almost always, you will find that right now, in this moment, you are okay. You are breathing. Your heart is beating. You are alive. Yes, there may be challenges. Yes, there may be difficulties. But in this specific moment, right now, you are managing. You are here. You are experiencing this moment, and you are not destroyed by it. This recognition that the present moment is almost always okay, even when our thoughts about the future are catastrophic, is deeply liberating. It teaches us that we can trust ourselves to meet whatever actually arrives when it arrives. We don't need to suffer in advance. We don't need to live 100 disasters in our minds. We can save our energy for meeting the real challenges when and if they come. And here's a profound truth. When real difficulties do arise, we meet them with more strength, more clarity, more resilience if we have not exhausted ourselves with constant worry. The person who has practiced staying present, who has practiced not believing every worried thought, has more inner resources available when truly needed. They are not depleted by imaginary battles. They are rested, centered, ready. This is not about positive thinking or pretending everything is always fine. Life brings real challenges, real losses, real suffering. The Buddha never denied this, but he showed us that we don't need to add unnecessary suffering by believing every frightening thought our minds produce. We can meet life's real difficulties with clear presence rather than anxious projection. The practice is moment by moment, breath by breath, thought by thought. Notice when the mind has jumped to the future. Notice the worried stories it's telling, and gently, patiently, lovingly, bring yourself back to right now. What is actually here? What is actually true? And in this moment, what is actually needed? This is the path to peace. Not a peace that depends on having a perfect life with no challenges, but a peace that can be present even in the midst of difficulty. A peace that comes from resting in reality rather than fighting with imagination. a peace that is always available in this moment, right now, if we simply return to what is actually happening rather than what we fear might happen. Let your breath be your anchor. Each time you notice your mind spinning worried stories about the future, feel your breath. This breath is happening now. It is real. It is your doorway back to the present moment. Breathe in, breathe out, and know that right now, in this moment, you are here. You are breathing. You are alive. And that is enough. Rest in this. Let yourself rest in the simplicity of this moment. There is nowhere else you need to be. Nothing else you need to do right now except breathe and be present. Trust that you have everything you need to meet whatever comes when it actually arrives. For now, just be here. Just breathe. Just rest in the awareness that is always present, always peaceful, always home. Take a slow, deep breath now. Feel your body softening. Feel the gentle rhythm of life moving through you. You are safe in this moment. You are held by this moment. There is nothing to fear right now. Just this breath. Just this awareness. Just this peace that is always available when you return to what is real. Breathe. Rest. And when you are ready, we will continue this journey together into even deeper truth. We turn now to another facet of this profound truth, another doorway into the freedom that comes from recognizing that you are not your thoughts. In a city known for its ancient university, where scholars from distant lands came to study philosophy and science and medicine, there lived a professor named Dr. Tanaka. He had taught philosophy for 30 years, specializing in theories of consciousness and the nature of the self. His office was lined floor to ceiling with books in multiple languages. His lectures were famous for their intellectual rigor and brilliance. Students competed to study with him, and his published papers were cited by philosophers around the world. Dr. Tanaka could explain any theory of mind you might name. He could discuss Descartes' cogito and Buddhist concepts of anatman with equal fluency. He could trace the development of consciousness studies from ancient Greek thought through modern neuroscience. He could argue about qualia and phenomenology and the hard problem of consciousness until his listeners' minds were spinning with complexity and nuance. But despite all this knowledge, despite his brilliant intellect and his prestigious position, Dr. Tanaka suffered from a deep and painful restlessness. He could not sleep well. His mind raced constantly, jumping from thought to thought, analyzing, categorizing, philosophizing about everything. Even simple experiences became occasions for complex intellectual processing. When he ate a meal, he didn't taste the food. Instead, he thought about the phenomenology of taste, the neurological processing of flavor, the cultural construction of culinary preferences. When he walked in the garden, he didn't feel the breeze or see the flowers. Instead, he thought about perception, about how the brain constructs reality from sensory data, about whether the redness of the rose was an objective property or a subjective experience. His mind was brilliant, but it was also a prison. He lived entirely in concepts, in ideas, in intellectual constructions. He had not had a moment of simple, direct experience in decades. Everything was filtered through layers of thinking about experience, rather than simply experiencing. His wife had left him years ago, exhausted by his inability to be present with her, his constant need to analyze and explain everything rather than simply living. His children, now grown, visited rarely. They found conversations with him draining. He couldn't hear what they were saying because he was too busy thinking about what they were saying, categorizing their words, relating them to philosophical frameworks. Dr. Tanaka was aware of his problem in an intellectual way. He had read the Zen teachings about direct experience. He could explain the difference between conceptual knowledge and embodied wisdom. He could write papers about the limitations of purely rational understanding. But he could not access this wisdom himself. He could only think about it, write about it, teach about it. The actual experience of it remained completely foreign to him. One autumn afternoon, Dr. Tanaka was visiting his daughter and his 3-year-old granddaughter Mika. They were sitting in the garden of his daughter's house, and Mika was playing with fallen leaves, gathering them into piles and then scattering them with squeals of delight. Dr. Tanaka sat on a bench, watching her, while simultaneously thinking about developmental psychology, the stages of play, the cognitive structures that allow for pretend play. Mika came running over to him, her small hands full of bright red and gold leaves. Her face was radiant with joy. "Grandpa," she said, holding out the leaves to him. "Look, they're beautiful." Dr. Tanaka smiled and began to speak. Yes, indeed. The autumn coloration of deciduous leaves is caused by the breakdown of chlorophyll, which reveals the carotenoid pigments that were present all along, but masked by the green. The red colors come from anthocyanins, which are actually produced in autumn as a response to... "Grandpa," Mika interrupted, looking confused. "I just said they're beautiful. Why are you talking about all those words?" Dr. Tanaka stopped. He looked at his granddaughter's face, at the simple joy there, at the leaves in her small hands, and something cracked open in his chest. Here was this child, experiencing beauty directly, offering to share that experience with him, and he had responded with a lecture on plant chemistry. He had not met her in her experience. He had not shared the beauty with her. He had only explained it, analyzed it, reduced it to concepts and mechanisms. "You're right," he said softly. "I'm sorry. They are beautiful." Mika smiled and pressed the leaves into his hands. "Feel them, Grandpa. They're crunchy and soft at the same time." Dr. Tanaka held the leaves, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't think about them. He didn't analyze or explain or relate them to any framework. He just felt them, the texture, the dryness, the delicate weight, the colors that his eyes received without his mind needing to say anything about them. Tears began to roll down his face. Mika looked at him with concern. "Why are you crying, Grandpa?" "Because," he said, his voice shaking, "I forgot how to just look at leaves. I forgot how to just be here. And you just reminded me." That evening, after returning to his empty house, Dr. Tanaka could not stop thinking about what had happened in the garden. Not thinking in his usual analytical way, but dwelling on the question, how had he lost the ability to simply experience life? When had everything become an object of intellectual analysis rather than direct encounter? He thought back to his childhood. He remembered playing in his grandmother's garden, completely absorbed in watching ants build their colony, feeling the sun on his back, smelling the herbs his grandmother grew. There had been no analysis then, just the fullness of being present with what was there. But then, school had taught him to think about things, to name them, categorize them, explain them. And he had been good at this, so good that it became his identity. He became the smart one, the intellectual, the boy who knows everything. And with each year, the thinking grew stronger, and the direct experience grew dimmer, until eventually there was only thinking about experience, never just experience itself. He realized he had spent 30 years teaching students how to think about consciousness without ever guiding them toward directly experiencing consciousness. He had written papers about the nature of mind without ever simply resting in the aware mind itself. He had become an expert on maps while forgetting that maps are not the territory they represent. That night, Dr. Tanaka did something he had not done in decades. He sat in Zazen, the Zen meditation posture he had read about countless times but never actually practiced. He sat on a cushion in his study, surrounded by his books, and he simply sat. His mind, of course, did not cooperate. It continued its relentless activity. Thoughts about meditation, thoughts about whether he was sitting correctly, thoughts about the philosophy of meditation, thoughts about meditation. The thinking machine could not stop itself, but something else began to happen. As he sat there, not trying to accomplish anything, not trying to achieve any particular state, just sitting with his restless mind, he began to notice something he had never noticed before. He began to notice that there was a space in which the thoughts were occurring, a kind of background awareness that was present before the thoughts, during the thoughts, and after the thoughts. It was like, and he caught himself about to build a conceptual framework about this, and he stopped. No, he would not think about this. He would just notice it, this awareness, this quality of being conscious that was different from the content of consciousness, this presence. He sat for an hour, which felt like both much longer and much shorter than an hour. When he finally stood up, his legs aching, something had shifted. The thoughts were still there, still active, still analyzing. But he had discovered something underneath them, something that was not thinking, something that was simply aware. Over the following weeks, Dr. Tanaka began a practice. Each morning before going to the university, he would sit for 30 minutes, not to achieve anything, not to become enlightened or peaceful or clear-minded, just to sit, just to notice the thoughts arising and passing, just to become acquainted with the awareness that was always there beneath the thinking. He also began to try to have moments during his day where he simply experienced rather than analyzed. Drinking his morning tea, he would pause and just taste it, just feel the warmth of the cup, just be present with the simple act of drinking tea. Walking across campus, he would sometimes stop trying to think about his next lecture and just walk, just feel his feet touching the ground, just see the sky and the trees without naming them or relating them to anything. It was extraordinarily difficult. His mind had 40 years of momentum pulling it toward constant conceptualization. But little by little, moment by moment, he began to find gaps in the thinking, spaces where there was just direct experience, just being rather than thinking about being. One day, several months into this practice, Dr. Tanaka was walking home from the university when he encountered an old woman sitting on a bench in the park. She had the calm, settled quality of someone who meditated, and something about her presence drew him. He sat down on the other end of the bench, not saying anything, just sitting. After a few minutes, the woman turned to him and smiled. "You are a teacher," she said. It was not a question. Dr. Tanaka nodded. "I teach philosophy at the university." "Ah," the woman said. "Many thoughts." Dr. Tanaka laughed despite himself. Yes. Too many thoughts? The woman nodded. I was a scholar once too, she said. Many books, many ideas, many words about truth. She paused, but never truth itself. Yes, Dr. Tanaka said, feeling understood in a way he rarely felt. That's exactly it. I know so much about consciousness, about awareness, about the nature of mind, but I haven't. You have not tasted the water, the woman said. Only read descriptions of water, only studied the chemical composition of water, only looked at maps showing where water can be found, but never bent down and drank. Dr. Tanaka felt tears again, the way he had in his daughter's garden. How do I drink? He asked. How do I stop just studying and start actually living? The woman looked at him with gentle eyes. Tell me, she said, what is thinking? Dr. Tanaka opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. The question seemed so simple, but he realized he was about to give an intellectual answer about neural processes and cognitive functions and theories of mind. But that wasn't what she was asking. I don't know, he said finally. Good, the woman said, smiling. Now you are being honest. Now we can really talk. She gestured to the park around them, to the trees and the people walking, and the birds in the branches. All of this, she said, you can experience directly, yes? The color of the leaves, the sound of the birds, the feeling of sitting on this bench. This is direct knowing. No thoughts needed. The eyes see, the ears hear, the body feels. This is knowing before thinking. Dr. Tanaka nodded slowly. But then, the woman continued, thought comes. Thought says, this is a tree. This is an oak tree. Oak trees belong to the genus Quercus. I learned about oaks in a botany class. That reminds me of my professor. I wonder what happened to him. And suddenly, you are not seeing the tree anymore. You are lost in a stream of associated thoughts, memories, ideas. The direct experience has been covered over by thinking about the experience. Yes, Dr. Tanaka said, that's what I do constantly. All humans do it, the woman said. This is what the thinking mind does. It takes immediate experience and wraps it in concepts, names, associations, stories. This is not wrong. This is just what minds do. The problem comes when we believe that the thoughts about the tree are more real than the tree itself. When we believe that the map is the territory. She leaned back against the bench. But you are not the thoughts, she said. You are what knows the thoughts. You are the awareness in which the thoughts appear. When you confuse yourself with the thinking, you suffer, because thoughts are always changing, always contradicting themselves, always creating problems that need solving. The thinking mind is never satisfied. It always wants more understanding, more knowledge, more certainty. But awareness itself is already complete, already satisfied, already at peace. How do I rest in awareness instead of getting lost in thoughts? Dr. Tanaka asked. You already know how, the woman said. You are doing it right now. Right now, you are aware of sitting here. You are aware of listening to my words. You are aware of the feeling of the bench beneath you. That awareness is not thinking. It is prior to thinking. Before your mind creates any concept about this moment, there is awareness of this moment. That awareness is what you are. That is your true nature. She stood up, preparing to leave. Keep sitting each morning, she said, but don't try to stop thoughts. Don't make thinking the enemy. Just notice that you are not the thoughts. Notice that you are what observes the thoughts. The thoughts come and go like weather. but the awareness that knows the thoughts, that never comes or goes, that is always present. Rest in that. Live from that. And you will find the peace that all your thinking could never give you. Dr. Tanaka sat on the bench long after the woman had gone. He watched his mind begin to analyze what she had said, to categorize her words, to relate them to Buddhist philosophy and Western phenomenology. And he noticed this happening. He noticed the thoughts arising. And in that noticing, there was a space, a gap, a pause before the next thought came. And in that gap, he found himself. Not Dr. Tanaka, the professor. Not the brilliant intellectual. Not the guy who knows everything. Just awareness. Just presence. Just the simple fact of being conscious, being alive, being here. It was nothing special, nothing mystical or magical, just the ordinary, ever-present awareness that had been here all along, hidden beneath decades of compulsive thinking. Like the blue sky hidden behind clouds, it had never actually gone anywhere. He had just forgotten to look for it. Over the following years, Dr. Tanaka's teaching began to change. He still covered the same material, the same philosophical theories and debates. But now, he would pause in his lectures and say to his students, "This is what Descartes thought about consciousness. But right now, before any thought about consciousness, you are conscious. You are aware. Can you notice that? Can you directly experience what we're only talking about?" At first, students were confused by these pauses, these invitations to stop thinking and simply be aware. But gradually, something shifted in his classroom. Students began to report that philosophy class had become a place where they not only learned about consciousness, but actually experienced it, where they not only studied theories of mind, but investigated their own minds directly. Dr. Tanaka's relationship with his daughter improved. When he visited now, he could actually be present with her and with Mika. He could hold his granddaughter without simultaneously thinking about child development. He could listen to his daughter's concerns without analyzing them or relating them to philosophical frameworks. He could just be there. Just be present, just be the awareness that received their words and their presence with love. He still thought, of course. The thinking habit of a lifetime doesn't disappear. But he was no longer imprisoned by thinking. He could think when thinking was useful and then let the thoughts go. He could rest in the direct experience of life, in the immediate awareness that is always present before any thought arises to interpret or explain or analyze that experience. And in that resting, he found a peace and a fullness that 40 years of philosophy had never delivered. Not because philosophy was wrong or useless, but because philosophy was about truth, not truth itself. The map, not the territory. The menu, not the meal. And what he discovered was simple, almost embarrassingly simple. You don't need to think about being alive in order to be alive. You are already alive. You are already aware. You are already complete. The thoughts can come and go, useful sometimes, distracting other times, but never the essence of what you are. You are the awareness itself, the consciousness that is prior to all thinking, the presence that is always here, always now, always free. This story reveals perhaps the subtlest and most profound dimension of the teaching that you are not your thoughts. Not only are you not your worried thoughts, or your critical thoughts, or your past-focused or future-focused thoughts, but you are not your intellectual thoughts, your understanding thoughts, your knowing thoughts. You are prior to all of it. You are the awareness in which all mental activity takes place. This is a challenging teaching because thought is so useful, so apparently essential to who we are. Our ability to think is what we often consider to be our defining characteristic as humans. We are the thinking animal, we tell ourselves. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Our entire education system is built on developing thinking skills. Our sense of self-worth often depends on how smart we are, how well we can think, how much we know. But the Buddha's teaching invites us to look deeper. Before thought, what is there? Before any concept arises in your mind, before any idea forms, before any analysis begins, there is awareness. There is consciousness. There is the simple fact of being awake and present. This awareness is not created by thinking. It is not the product of mental activity. Rather, thinking happens within awareness. Thinking is something that awareness does, or that happens in awareness, but awareness itself is more fundamental, more primary, more essentially what you are than any thought content. Western philosophy eventually arrived at similar insights, though often through very different paths. The phenomenologists spoke of pre-reflective consciousness, the awareness that is present before we reflect on our experience, before we think about what we're experiencing. Heidegger wrote about being as something that precedes and grounds all particular thoughts about beings. But these remained largely intellectual ideas, subjects for academic debate. The Buddha's teaching is not academic. It is experiential. It is an invitation to directly discover, in your own immediate experience, this awareness that precedes thought. To find the consciousness that is always here, always present, always aware, regardless of what thoughts are or aren't arising. This is what Dr. Tanaka discovered in his encounter with his granddaughter. For a moment, the relentless thinking stopped, and there was just direct experience. Just the leaves, just the child's joy, just the simple presence of being there. And in that moment, he touched something he had been reading about for 30 years, but had never actually experienced, his own nature as awareness itself, not as thought about awareness. This discovery is revolutionary because it reveals that peace, contentment, and fulfillment don't depend on having the right thoughts or the right understanding. The thinking mind is always seeking, always looking for the next insight, the next understanding, the next piece of knowledge that will finally make everything clear and bring lasting peace. But that peace is never found through thinking, because thinking by its nature is always incomplete, always pointing towards something it doesn't yet have. Awareness itself, however, is already complete, already whole, already at peace. It doesn't need to understand anything. It doesn't need to figure anything out. It simply is. It is the space in which all experience arises and passes away, and it is utterly undisturbed by the content of that experience. This doesn't mean thinking is bad or useless. Thinking is a wonderful tool. It allows us to plan, to communicate, to create, to solve problems, to understand patterns and relationships. Dr. Tanaka didn't stop thinking or stop teaching philosophy. He simply discovered that he was not the thinking. He was the awareness in which thinking occurred. And from that recognition, thinking could be used skillfully rather than being a compulsive, exhausting process that never stopped. The practice here is to begin noticing the difference between thinking and awareness. This is subtle at first because we're so identified with our thoughts that we don't recognize there's anything else. But with patient practice, the distinction becomes clear. Right now, as you listen to these words, thoughts are probably arising. Maybe agreeing or disagreeing with what's being said. Maybe relating this to your own experience. Maybe planning or remembering or drifting off into some tangent. Notice that there is something that is aware of those thoughts. Something that knows they're happening. That knowing, that awareness, is not itself a thought. It's the space in which thoughts appear. You can practice this throughout your day. When a thought arises, instead of immediately following it, or believing it, or reacting to it, pause for just a moment and notice, I am aware of this thought. In that noticing, you are already standing as awareness, rather than being identified as the thought. You are already recognizing your true nature. This is not about achieving a special state where no thoughts arise. That's not possible for most people, and it's not necessary. The point is not to have a blank mind, but to recognize what you are, regardless of whether the mind is blank or full of thoughts. To discover the awareness that is here, whether you're thinking or not thinking, whether thoughts are pleasant or unpleasant, whether the mind is quiet or noisy. Some traditions call this the witness or the observer. But even these names can be misleading because they suggest there's a separate entity doing the witnessing. What we're actually pointing to is simpler than that. It's the bare fact of consciousness itself, the simple knowing that is always present. Not I am aware, which still implies a separate self, but just awareness is happening. Just consciousness is present. Just knowing is occurring. This awareness is completely ordinary. It's not mystical or supernatural. It's the most basic, most obvious, most ever-present aspect of your experience. And yet, it's easily overlooked because we're so focused on the content of consciousness, the thoughts, sensations, emotions, that we miss the consciousness itself. It's like how you don't usually notice the screen when you're watching a movie. You're absorbed in the story, the characters, the action. But the screen is always there, unchanging, allowing all the images to appear on it. Awareness is like the screen. Thoughts and experiences are like the images. The images come and go, change and flow, but the screen remains constant. When you recognize yourself as the screen, rather than as the images, everything shifts. The drama of your thoughts loses its overwhelming intensity. You can have thoughts without being imprisoned by them. You can experience emotions without being destroyed by them. You can live fully, engage completely, but from a place of fundamental peace that doesn't depend on your thoughts or circumstances being any particular way. This is what the Buddha called liberation or freedom. Not freedom from having a human life with its challenges and difficulties, but freedom from the suffering that comes from identifying completely with the changing contents of consciousness. Freedom to rest in the unchanging awareness that holds it all. The practice is gentle and patient. You don't force this recognition. You don't make it happen through effort. You simply become curious about your own experience. You begin to look not just at what you're thinking, but at what is aware of the thinking. You begin to notice not just what you're feeling, but what knows you're feeling it. You begin to rest in the awareness itself, rather than being lost in what awareness is aware of. And slowly, naturally, effortlessly, the center of gravity of your identity shifts. You stop feeling like you are the thoughts and start recognizing that you are the awareness in which thoughts appear. You stop feeling like you are the emotions and start recognizing that you are the consciousness that experiences emotions. You stop feeling like you are the body and start recognizing that you are the awareness that knows the body. This doesn't make you detached or disconnected from life. Paradoxically, it allows you to be more fully present, more deeply engaged, more authentically responsive to what life brings. Because you're no longer defending a false self made of thoughts. You're no longer trying to maintain a conceptual identity. You're simply here, simply aware, simply being what you actually are. The open, spacious, peaceful consciousness in which all of life unfolds. Rest in this now. Don't try to understand it conceptually. Just notice that you are aware. Notice that awareness itself has no problems, even if the contents of awareness include problems. Notice that consciousness itself is at peace, even if the contents of consciousness include disturbance. You are that consciousness. You are that awareness. You are that peace. Let yourself rest in what you are, rather than in what you think about what you are. Let yourself be awareness, rather than trying to understand awareness. Let yourself rest in the simple, obvious, ever-present fact that right now, in this moment, you are conscious, you are aware, you are here. And that awareness, that consciousness, that presence, that is enough. That is everything. That is who you truly are. Take a long, slow breath now. Feel your body resting. Feel the awareness that knows the body resting. Feel the peace that is always here when you stop seeking it through thinking and simply recognize it as your own nature. Breathe. Rest. Be. You are home. You have always been home. You just forgot to notice. Let us pause here for a moment. Feel the gentle rhythm of your own breath, a quiet anchor in the flow of time. Allow your body to soften, releasing any tension you might be holding in your shoulders, your jaw, your hands. Let gravity do its work, pulling you down into deep rest. You are here. You are present. You are aware. This awareness that is reading these words, this consciousness that is present right now, is your true nature. It has never been disturbed, never been broken, never been lost. It is always here, always peaceful, always home. If these teachings bring you comfort, if this sanctuary of Sleepy Monk feels like a refuge for your restless mind, I gently invite you to subscribe. Join this community of seekers who gather here each night to rest in ancient wisdom. But there is no pressure. Simply receive what resonates and let the rest flow past like water in a stream. Now, gently, when you are ready, we will continue our journey into this liberating truth. We will explore another story, another doorway into freedom. Take one more deep breath and let us continue together. In a small village where narrow streets wound between old wooden houses and the temple bell rang each evening at sunset, there lived a night watchman named Hiroshi. His job was simple but important. He walked the grounds of the old temple that sat at the center of the village, making sure all was well through the long hours of darkness. He carried a lantern and a wooden staff, and every hour he would walk the perimeter, checking doors, listening for anything unusual, ensuring that the sacred space remained safe and peaceful. Hiroshi had been a night watchman for 15 years. Before that, he had been a police officer in the city. He had left that job and the city itself after an incident that haunted him still. Late one night, he had responded to a domestic violence call. When he arrived at the apartment, he found a man beating his wife. Hiroshi had tried to intervene, to pull the man away, and in the struggle that followed, the man had fallen and struck his head on the corner of a table. He had died 3 days later from the injury. The death was ruled an accident. Hiroshi was cleared of any wrongdoing. The investigation showed that he had acted appropriately, that he had been trying to protect the woman, that the man's death was a tragic result of his own violence rebounding on himself. But none of this official exoneration changed how Hiroshi felt. He had taken a life. Even if unintentionally, even if unavoidably, he had been the instrument of another human being's death, and he could not forgive himself for it, could not let it go, could not move past it. The incident replayed in his mind constantly. Every night as he tried to sleep, he would see it again. The apartment, the man's angry face, the struggle, the fall, the horrible sound of the man's head hitting the table. Over and over, the scene would play, sometimes exactly as it happened, sometimes with variations where Hiroshi tried to intervene differently, where he imagined ways he could have prevented the death. The thoughts were intrusive, overwhelming, relentless. They would come at any moment, while he was eating, while he was walking, while he was trying to read or watch television. They would hijack his attention completely, dragging him back into that apartment, back into that moment, back into the guilt and horror and self-recrimination. Eventually, unable to continue as a police officer while carrying this weight, Hiroshi had quit his job, left the city, and come to this quiet village. He thought perhaps that a different environment, a simpler life, work that didn't involve any possibility of violence, might give him peace. But the thoughts followed him. They didn't care where he lived or what job he did. They arose with the same frequency, the same intensity, as if that night 5 years ago was still happening, was always happening, would never stop happening. He began to practice Zen meditation on the recommendation of the elderly monk who was the temple's caretaker. The monk, whose name was Joshu, had been kind to Hiroshi from the moment he arrived in the village. Sensing the younger man's suffering, he had invited him to sit zazen in the meditation hall each morning before his night shift. Hiroshi had tried. He would sit on the cushion, trying to focus on his breath the way Joshu had taught him, trying to be present in the moment. But the thoughts would come crashing in, the memories, the images, the guilt, and he would find himself lost in them, sometimes for the entire meditation period, his body sitting on the cushion, but his mind trapped in that apartment 5 years ago. "I can't do it," he told Joshu one morning after a particularly difficult meditation session. "The thoughts are too strong. They won't leave me alone. I've been trying for months, but I can't stop them. I can't make my mind quiet. Maybe I'm just not capable of meditation." Joshu looked at him with eyes that held both compassion and something else, something like amusement, though not unkind. "Who said anything about stopping thoughts?" the old monk asked. Hiroshi was confused. "Isn't that the point? To clear the mind? To achieve emptiness? To stop thinking?" "Ah," Joshu said, nodding slowly. "That is what many people believe. But that is not quite right. We don't sit to stop thoughts. We sit to see thoughts, to see them clearly, to see what they are." "But the thoughts are so painful," Hiroshi said. "They torment me. How can I just sit and watch them?" "The thoughts themselves are not the problem," Joshu said. "Thoughts are like sounds. When a bird calls outside the meditation hall, does it disturb you?" "Sometimes," Hiroshi admitted. "But the bird is just singing. It's not trying to disturb you. It's just being a bird. The disturbance comes from your reaction to the sound, not from the sound itself. But these aren't just random thoughts, Hiroshi protested. These are memories of something terrible I did, something I can never undo. How can I just treat them like bird songs? Joshu was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Come with me tonight. Stay awake through your entire shift. Don't try to rest. And after your shift, instead of going home to sleep, come back here and sit with me. We will sit through the dawn together." Hiroshi agreed, though he wasn't sure what the monk intended. That night, he walked his rounds as usual, but he deliberately kept himself alert, drinking tea, splashing cold water on his face, moving continuously to avoid drowsiness. By the time the sun began to rise, he was exhausted, his eyes burning, his body aching. He went to the meditation hall where Joshu was already sitting. The old monk gestured to the cushion beside him, and Hiroshi sat, his body heavy with fatigue. "Now," Joshu said softly, "just sit. Don't try to do anything special. Just sit with whatever arises." The meditation began, and as expected, the thoughts came. The memories, the guilt, the replaying of that terrible night. But something was different. Hiroshi was so tired that he didn't have the energy to fight the thoughts, to resist them, to try to make them go away. He simply didn't have the strength for the usual struggle. So the thoughts just were there, like clouds in the sky, like sounds in the air. They arose, and he was aware of them, and they passed, and new thoughts arose, and gradually, through the fog of his exhaustion, he began to notice something he had never noticed before. The thoughts were not continuous. Between one thought and the next, there was a gap, a tiny space of silence. Usually, he was so caught up in the content of the thoughts, or so busy fighting them, that he never noticed these gaps. But now, too tired to maintain that level of engagement, he could see them. Little moments where there was no thought, little windows of space between the mental images, and in those gaps there was peace. Not the peace of having resolved anything, or understood anything, or achieved anything. Just the peace of absence, the absence of thinking, the absence of the mental replay, just awareness, just presence, just this moment without any story about the past. The gaps were brief, maybe a second or two. Then another thought would arise, and he would be caught in it again. But now he had seen the gaps. He knew they were there. And he began to notice that even when the thoughts were present, there was something that was aware of the thoughts, something that was watching them arise and pass, something that was not disturbed by them in the way his personal self was disturbed. They sat for 2 hours. As the sun rose and light began to fill the meditation hall, Hiroshi felt something shifting. The thoughts about the incident still arose. They might always arise. He was beginning to understand that, but they were no longer the totality of his experience. They were events in awareness, not the awareness itself. When Joshu finally rang the bell to end the meditation, Hiroshi bowed and looked at the old monk with new eyes. "The thoughts are not me," he said slowly, testing this new understanding. "They're just happening in me, through me. But they're not what I am." Joshu smiled. "Yes, you are the sky in which the thoughts appear like clouds. Some clouds are pleasant, soft and white and drifting. Some clouds are dark and heavy with rain. But the sky is not troubled by any of them. The sky simply allows them to be, to move, to change. The sky is vast enough to hold all weather without being disturbed by any of it. But the guilty thoughts still hurt. Hiroshi said. Even if they're not me, they still cause pain. Yes, Joshu agreed. Pain is real. What happened 5 years ago was real. The man's death was real. Your part in it was real. These are facts, but the story your mind tells about these facts, the constant reliving of them, the judgment that you are a terrible person because of them, the belief that you can never be forgiven or at peace, these are thoughts. These are mental events, and they are optional. He paused, letting this sink in. You cannot change the past. It happened, and it will always have happened. But you can change your relationship to the memory of the past. You can see it as a memory, a thought arising in present awareness, rather than as a current event that is happening now. Right now, in this moment, you are not in that apartment. You are here. You are breathing. You are alive. The only place that incident still exists is in your thoughts, and thoughts are like everything else in the world. They arise, they persist for a time, and they pass away. Over the following weeks and months, Hiroshi continued his meditation practice. Some days were easier than others. Some days the thoughts of that night were quiet, arising only occasionally. Other days they were overwhelming, arising again and again with their familiar intensity. But gradually, he learned to recognize them as thoughts rather than as reality. He learned to see them arising in the space of his awareness, like birds flying across the sky, there and then gone. He also learned something else, that he could feel guilt and remorse without being destroyed by it, that he could acknowledge what had happened, could wish it had been different, could hold the complexity of being someone who had unintentionally caused harm while trying to prevent greater harm, and still be fundamentally okay, still be at peace underneath it all. The thoughts still came. Even years later, when he was still working as a night watchman, still walking the temple grounds each night, the memory would sometimes arise. But it no longer controlled him. It no longer defined him. It was a thought about something that had happened, but it was not happening now. And he was not the thought. He was the awareness in which the thought arose and passed away. One night, several years after he had begun practicing with Joshu, Hiroshi was sitting by the temple pond during a break in his rounds. The moon was nearly full, and its light reflected on the still water. He was watching the reflection, noticing how perfectly clear and bright it was, when suddenly a breeze disturbed the water. The moon's reflection shattered into 1,000 pieces, scattered across the rippling surface. Hiroshi watched as the ripples gradually subsided. And as they did, the moon's reflection slowly reformed, returning to its perfect clarity. The breeze had disturbed the water, but it had not disturbed the moon. The real moon, high in the sky, had remained utterly unchanged throughout. Only the reflection had been broken and reformed. He understood suddenly that his mind was like the pond, and his thoughts were like the ripples. When disturbing thoughts arose, they shattered the stillness, broke up the clarity. But the awareness itself, the moon of consciousness, remained unchanged. The surface of the pond was affected, but the depths were always still. The reflection was broken, but the reality it reflected was always whole. He sat by the pond for a long time that night, watching the moon and its reflection, understanding in a way that went deeper than words that he was not the disturbed surface of the pond. He was the sky in which the moon floated. He was the space in which both the pond and its ripples existed. He was the awareness that was never touched by the content it was aware of. Joshu found him there near dawn, still sitting by the pond. The old monk sat down beside him without speaking. After a while, Hiroshi said, "I understand now. The thoughts will never stop coming, but they can't actually hurt me. Only my belief in them can hurt me. Only my identification with them can hurt me." "Yes," Joshu said simply, "you have found the freedom that is always available. Not freedom from thoughts, but freedom from being imprisoned by thoughts. This is the peace that does not depend on having only pleasant thoughts or comfortable circumstances. This is the peace that can be present regardless of what arises in the mind." They sat together in silence as the sun rose, two figures beside a still pond, two expressions of the same awareness that holds all experience without being disturbed by any of it. And in that silence, in that stillness, there was nothing that needed to be fixed or changed or resolved. Just presence, just awareness, just peace. Hiroshi's story illuminates one of the most healing aspects of recognizing that you are not your thoughts. It allows us to have thoughts and memories about difficult experiences without being destroyed by them. It gives us a way to carry our past without being imprisoned by it. Trauma, guilt, regret, shame, these are all experiences that most humans encounter at some point. We all make mistakes. We all have experiences we wish we could undo. We all carry memories that hurt when they arise. This is part of being human. The Buddha never suggested that we should be able to prevent such experiences or eliminate such memories. But what creates unbearable suffering is not the memories themselves. It's our complete identification with the thoughts about those memories. When a difficult memory arises and we believe we are that memory. When a guilty thought arises and we believe we are a guilty person. When a shameful thought arises and we believe we are fundamentally shameful, then we have no space, no distance, no breathing room. We are trapped inside the thought, and the thought becomes our entire reality. This is what Hiroshi experienced for years. The thought, "I caused someone's death," arose, and he believed this made him fundamentally flawed, irredeemably guilty, unworthy of peace. The memory of that night would arise, and it was as if he was back in that moment, experiencing it again, unable to escape. There was no separation between Hiroshi and his thoughts about what had happened. They were completely fused. But when he learned to see thoughts as events arising in awareness, rather than as his identity, everything shifted. The memory still arose. The guilty feelings still arose. But now there was space around them. They were experiences he was having, not what he was. He could hold them in the larger context of his being, in the vast awareness that was his true nature, and they could be there without destroying him. This is what it means to be the sky rather than the weather. The sky allows all weather. It doesn't pick and choose. Storm clouds are allowed. Rain is allowed. Lightning is allowed. But the sky is never harmed by any of it. The sky remains clear and spacious behind and beyond whatever weather passes through. Similarly, when you recognize yourself as awareness rather than as thought content, you can allow all mental weather. Difficult memories can arise, guilty thoughts can arise, painful feelings can arise. But they arise in you, the vast awareness, and you are not damaged by them. You remain fundamentally okay, even as difficult experiences pass through your consciousness. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is not pretending painful things aren't painful. Hiroshi never denied that what happened was tragic. He never pretended he felt fine about it. He allowed the pain, the remorse, the regret, but he stopped believing that these feelings defined his fundamental nature. He stopped believing that having these thoughts meant he was irredeemably broken. The practice here is to notice the space between thoughts. This is what Hiroshi discovered when he was too exhausted to maintain his usual resistance. Between one thought and the next, there is a gap. Sometimes it's barely perceptible, just a fraction of a second, but it's there. And in that gap, there is silence, there is peace, there is the awareness that exists before and after and during thoughts, but is not itself a thought. You can practice noticing these gaps right now. Pay attention to your thinking. Watch a thought arise, notice it fully, and then watch what happens when it passes. Before the next thought comes, there's a space, a pause, a moment of thoughtless awareness. Most of the time, we miss it because we're already jumping to the next thought. But if you pay careful attention, you can catch these moments. And each time you do, you are touching your true nature. You are resting in the awareness that you are. Over time, this practice changes your relationship to difficult thoughts and memories. They no longer feel so solid, so permanent, so definitively true. They become more transparent, more obviously temporary. You learn that you can have the thought without being had by the thought. You can experience the memory without being trapped in the memory. And this creates a kind of resilience, a flexibility that allows you to carry difficult experiences without being broken by them. You can acknowledge what happened while also knowing that what happened is not what's happening now. You can feel appropriate remorse or sadness while also resting in the peace that is always present underneath all emotion. This is what the Buddhist tradition calls non-attachment or letting go. But these phrases can be misunderstood. It doesn't mean you stop caring or become cold and detached. It means you stop clinging to thoughts and memories as if they were solid, permanent truths about reality. You stop believing that difficult thoughts about the past mean you can't be at peace in the present. Hiroshi learned to let go, not by suppressing or denying his memories, but by seeing them clearly as memories, as thoughts about the past arising in present awareness. And in that clear seeing, they lost their power to imprison him. He could remember what happened without being destroyed by remembering it. He could feel remorse without being defined by remorse. He could carry his past while also being fully present in the moment. This is available to all of us. Whatever difficult memories or thoughts you carry, they are arising in the space of your awareness. That awareness is like the sky, vast, clear, unchanging, fundamentally at peace. The thoughts and memories are like weather passing through. Sometimes the weather is pleasant, sometimes it's difficult, but the sky remains unharmed either way. You are that sky. You are that awareness. No matter what thoughts arise, no matter what memories surface, they cannot actually damage your true nature. They appear in you, move through you, pass away, but you remain. The awareness remains. The peace that is deeper than any mental weather remains. Practice recognizing this in your own experience. When a difficult thought arises, pause. Notice that there is awareness of the thought. That awareness, the space in which the thought appears, is not troubled by the thought. Rest in that awareness. Rest as that awareness, and know that this is your true refuge. This is the peace that cannot be taken from you by any thought, any memory, any circumstance. You are not your thoughts. You are the vast, open, spacious awareness in which all thoughts arise and pass away. And that awareness is always at peace, always at home, always free. Rest here now. Let difficult thoughts be there if they're there. Don't fight them. Don't judge yourself for having them. Just notice that you are the awareness that knows the thoughts, and rest in that knowing. Rest in that awareness. Rest in the peace that is always present when you stop trying to be something other than what you are. Breathe slowly. Feel the peace that is here beneath the mind's activity. Feel the awareness that is always present, always clear, always home. This is who you are. This is what you have always been. This is what you will always be. Rest now in this truth. Rest in your own awareness. Rest in the peace that no thought can disturb.